Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I'm John.
Charlie. I'm Frank Wetta.
And I'm Josh. And today it's nice to have two new people on our panel. On the far left, John, who I met writing for a school newspaper. He's also a member of the English department. And on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, I don't know if I could say that much because I say math is on the other end of the spectrum, is Dr. Frank Wetta from our college's history department. Nice to have you.
Thank you.
And you have a book here as well. Did you write that book?
Yes, I did write that book. I wrote it with a colleague of mine, Martin Novelli. It's entitled, here, I'll promote the book. It's entitled The Long Reconstruction of the Post-Civil War South in History, Film, and Memory with Routledge Press. And it deals with the memory of the Civil War in film, in history, in literature.
Okay.
And came out 2013.
We'll definitely leave a link to it at the bottom of the description, and hopefully you guys go and check it out. Speaking of which, we're going to be talking about something very similar today. What are we going over today, Laney?
Today we are discussing A Late Encounter with the Enemy by Flannery OConnor.
Okay. It was it's probably in a handful of anthologies, but it was quite a challenge to look for. Anyway, what's our first question?
Do you feel that this short story can be deemed as a work of Confederate literature? Is there enough discussion about the Civil War to make it one?
Okay. Flannery OConnor was a Southern writer, a Catholic writer, and a rather difficult one, I think, to read from time to time.
She was a difficult person.
Well, she really, I think, quite interesting. You know, she never married. She lived with her mother. She suffered from lupus, which caused her early death. She was deeply Southern in her background and in her accent. When she went to the Iowa Writers' School, some people couldn't understand her. Her Southern accent was so thick. But she has this Gothic black humor in her writings. A Good Man is Hard to Find is one of her most famous short stories.
Isn't that the one, the older woman?
Yes. Yeah.
With the thug.
Right. There's a short story where a traveling salesman steals this young woman's wooden leg, and so it's filled with these bizarre characters. The Tattooed Man and so forth.
That's similar to like
the Temple of the Holy Ghost is one of her short stories. But she is a well respected writer and very much part of the traditions of American literature, and I wouldn't say she's just solely or say she's a Southern writer. I mean, she's a writer. Her stories take place in the South, but I think they are of universal interest and universal meaning. But one of the stories she wrote is this: A Late Encounter with the Enemy. And you were talking about the background to it. Maybe you want to say a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, it was inspired by a painting of William J. Bush, who was over 100 years old, giving a speech at his wife's graduation. I mean, I think he lived to 107, I believe. But so that was the inspiration for it. So I mean,
there may have been a handful of them that lived into their 100s. There was another book that came out, Oldest Living Confederate Woman Tells All.
Right.
I think
I think back then, especially farther back ago, there was not that sanitation was not, very minimal, if not so primitive. People didn't live past. Now this is just an estimate. Some people would not live past, I think, 50 or 60, because there was, medicine was very limited,
I think that is true. I don't really think that can be equipped to the story, though,
Yeah, no.
because it deals with a 104-year-old
No, I know.
Confederate soldier and his 62-year-old granddaughter.
That's-
And 62-year-old granddaughter is returning college student,
Yeah.
and
But no, that, that's the exception,
but just the nature of him being in the Civil War, him having that background, even though he doesn't really remember or care about what has happened, he just cares about here, now, the women.
Yeah, he was a
And,
womanizer.
And just the
The girls.
idea of the recollection at the ceremony.
I think to set this story in context, what Flannery O'Connor's dealing with in this story is the memory of the Confederacy, the memory of the Civil War, the lost cause, and really the concept of memory. Remember that one of the major holidays in the American South, even to today, is Confederate Memorial Day. And every southern state has a state holiday, usually on a Tuesday. In fact, I even looked it up because I wasn't sure which days they were on. But in 2015, Confederate Memorial Day was Monday, January 19th. In Florida, Sunday, April 26th. Alabama, Florida, Georgia, April 27th, Monday. Mississippi is April 27th. North Carolina, May 10th. South Carolina, May 10th. These are state holidays. It'll be interesting to see with this controversy over the rebel battle flag, whether those state holidays will be changed. I suppose what they'll run into is the fact that state workers get off on a Monday or Tuesday. Do they want to give up their holiday no matter what the political issues are? I suspect what they'll probably try to do is turn it into another kind of
Especially when they make
turn into another kind of holiday.
Especially when they make you work and they'll pay you more.
But what you're dealing with is that at the end of the Civil War, I would argue that there was a persistence of memory and a persistence of resistance. That is, even though the Confederacy loses the war, they do not entirely concede the issues.
They won the peace.
Yeah, I think you could argue in important ways what the South wins is the memory war. We argue in the book that if you look at films, particularly some of the great classics like Birth of a Nation, 1915,
Okay.
later Gone with the Wind, they're very pro-Southern. They're also two of the most important films ever made. Birth of a Nation is a classic of filmmaking. Now, it's viciously racist in its portrayal of black people, and very pro-Confederate in its interpretation of what the Civil War was about. The South is oppressed.
It also resurrected the KKK.
It helped do that, yes, exactly. I think that, after 1865, by 1866, particularly, there's an insurgency in the South against the Republican Party in the South, black voting, and the consequences of the war. And that insurgency takes the form of not only violent resistance in the form of the Klan or various other resistance groups, the Knights of the White Camellia, the White League, rifle associations of various kinds. There's a whole wave of violence and terrorism across the South aimed against the Republican Party in particular and black voters.
It's funny that just about 100 years later, that flip-flopped when Lyndon Johnson approved of the Civil
Yeah,
War.
that's a lot of people remember Johnson and the Vietnam War, but he did more for civil rights than any other president, I think, except for Lincoln. So in an insurgency involved not only the violent resistance, but a ideological resistance, a sort of propaganda. And the lost cause, the image of the lost cause, that Confederate soldiers, and there are certain elements to that lost cause ideology. And the lost cause ideology was that they fought bravely, the Confederate soldiers, that they did not fight for slavery, they said, that they fought for states' rights, their homes, and that sort of thing.
Their family.
Yeah, and this becomes the dominant narrative in many ways of the American Civil War. It's, there's that old saying that the winners write the history.
Mm-hmm.
Not so the American Civil War and Reconstruction. I think it was the losers that wrote the history. And that lost cause ideology of the Southern soldier as the brave underdog overwhelmed that. They didn't, and another part of the lost cause myth is that they didn't lose because the North was better at this war than the South was, but they were overwhelmed by numbers. That a kind of lost cause and last stand sort of.
Well, logistically, the North just, they owned the railroads, so they were able to move supplies in such a way that the South couldn't.
Well, the South used railroads as well. The Confederacy used railroads as well.
What is the next question?
Why write about a really old Confederate soldier? Why not a Union soldier? Bit of overlap in here, but
I think
Well,
that,
Walt Whitman wrote about Union soldiers and there have been a lot of writings about Union soldiers as well as other, but I think because this comes out of her tradition, she lives in Georgia and she's writing in the tradition of Southern literature, so I think that's why she picks this. But I mean, it's just brilliant that she, the way she does it. Can I read just a little bit from
Yeah, absolutely.
would that be all right? O'Connor, with that savage wit and irony that suffused her writing, describes the scene, and in doing so turns so many of the lost cause cliches on their head. The old man walks slowly up the aisle with his fierce white head high and his hat held over his heart. This is the old general shows up on the stage for this reunion, right? And and he's the honored guest, the old general. The orchestra began to play the Confederate battle hymn very softly, and the UDC, United Daughters of the Confederacy, members rose as a group and did not sit down again until the general was on the stage. When he reached the center of the stage, with Sally Poker just behind him, guiding his elbow, the orchestra burst into a loud rendition of the battle hymn, and the old man, with real stage presence, gave a vigorous, trembling salute and stood at attention until the last blast had died away. Two of the usherettes in Confederate caps and short skirts held a Confederate and Union flag crossed behind them. Writing doesn't get much better than that. I mean, it's just brilliant. When asked his age, the general screams, 92. Pretending to be impressed and amazed, the master of ceremonies addresses the audience. Let's give the general the biggest hand we've got. And to the general's chagrin, signals to Sally to get him off the stage as quickly as possible. But the general has something to say. Will it be about the war, about its triumphs and tragedies, about his memories? He elbowed his granddaughter roughly away. How I keep so young, he screeched. I kiss all the pretty girls. In fact, pretty girls seem to be the only thing the general now really remembers. And what she does is she takes the lost cause memory and turns it on its head and makes it into an absurdity.
I think you got to take into account that she is a Southern writer, so she is writing what she knows, but also writing about a Confederate soldier over a Union one is when the memories begin to spill out, it provides that sense of regret because I think the Confederates had much more to regret at that time than the Union soldiers.
Well, yeah, they lost the war, and that they were the first Americans to suffer that kind of, Europeans were used to a history of defeat, but Americans were used to a history of victory and triumph over adversity. That was our national tradition. And part of that's what separated Northerners from Southerners, was the development of a different historical memory about what life is about.
You know, I think as far as relatability to the character, you know, somebody who's lost is going to be looking for things to grab onto for glory. You know, because if you're constantly facing that loss and the defeat, you know, you're just going to be, you know, a defeated person. But you're going to look for the positives, and you're going to constantly grasp it. And so that's what the Confederates, you know, the South always has done. You know, anything, you know, even going back to the first, you know, is it Confederate literature? You know, even if it's only mentioned a little bit, of course they're going to grab onto it because it's something they can claim as theirs. You know, the Union, they won. You know, you don't have to fake glory because you achieved it. So there is no need for a Union soldier to be faking his
that
past
much is true.
and living a lie.
Yeah.
Perfectly agree with that.
That's
Your
well said.
thinking glory would be pretty hard to hide too.
The fact that if someone in the Union, their memories, it would be much more, if they had that kind of flashback, it would be glorified in a way. It would be the fact that there was that they achieved satisfaction with General Sash. It was this idea of what he did not achieve, or what he did achieve, but how it amounted to nothing.
Of course, in the short story, he can't remember anything.
And
He
he
can't
wasn't
even
even a
remember
general.
that he was in the war.
No,
You know, he wasn't
could have
even
been
a general.
foot soldier.
No, he was never general. That's true.
No.
You know,
Right, so
it's,
he's living as this general.
he's the embodiment of this lost cause
Mhm.
memory, which for Flannery has lost any real value, I think, in her view.
Ready then? Our next question.
Who or what do you believe is the enemy?
Let's take a crack at this.
It's
Well, I just
simple.
took a crack a few minutes ago. I'm surprised no one said anything.
It's simple because the enemy is the self.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, it doesn't have to relate to, you know, the South, the North. You know, if you live a lie and you're not honest with yourself, you are not going to get, you know, the full meaning of your life.
I
regardless
definitely
of what
agree
you
that it did come from within.
Yeah.
You know, and whether it's positive or negative, because you have those people, you know, that write something extremely well, you know, turns out, you know, and they're criticizing themselves, and then the other people who think it's better than it is, you know, either one is not going, you know, if they sit down, take the criticism, you know, it's like every writer needs an editor, you know, so just because you're edited more or less, it's the end product that is going to matter. If you lie and say, well, it doesn't need to be edited, or, you know, you go in and you're constantly looking for mistakes, you're never going to reach that finished product.
Ready? Yeah, I think that does make plenty of sense to see that Jack Ball.
I was going to say, now taking a crack at it, time. You know, as time goes by, memory fades. This is common knowledge. You know, facts get distorted over time. Was I there? Oh, I was there. And when you really weren't, or vice versa.
That's just either dementia or Alzheimer's,
Oh, yeah.
or just
Especially-
age in general.
Yeah, that like I said, time, age.
Well, there's history,
Mhm.
and
That's
then
it.
there's what we think the history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the memory. Sometimes it's not so important what happened, it's what we think happened
Mhm.
and how we remember it. That's a big part of, you know, there's a historian by the name of Paul Cohen who argued that there are really three approaches to history. One is the event, what happened, and historians reconstruct those. You know, the past does not exist per se. The past, you know, kind of floats in the cloud somewhere. And what historians do is bring together the evidence and construct a story. We're the ones that say this event is important. People living in a particular time may not have any idea what, you know, they have no idea what the future is. You know, we live in the present. We don't know what the future will bring. And it's historians who say, well, 1066, you know, that was an important date. That transformed the history of England and so on. Or, you know, the Battle of Gettysburg was, you know, a turning point in the Civil War. Historians say that.
Bloodiest battle in American
Yeah,
history.
and so, you know, events in history are creation of historians. Then you have the event itself, the participants, the people in the time and place it happens. They may have no idea of what the meaning of this event is. You know, there was a British officer at the Battle of the Somme in 1916, one of the great battles of the First World War. And he later said, "I didn't know I was in the battle until I read it in a newspaper later."
Wow.
And, you know, if you were at the, if you were at the battle of, if you were at Normandy, the invasion of Normandy, and you were a soldier coming ashore, you'd see, 100 yards in front of you, and 100 yards on your right, 100 yards on your left, and you didn't know what was happening anywhere else, or and then the other thing is what he calls so it's history as event. History as is experienced, and then history as myth. What we make of that history, usable history. Mm-hmm. We might use history for racial pride, national honor, all kinds of uses of history. And I think this is what Flannery O'Connor's doing. Particularly, I mean, we're talking here about the Civil War, but it could be about almost any event. World War II, the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes a great writer.
Yeah, I agree.
What I wanted to say is, with you, you said there were several approaches to history. The one that stuck out to me was about how I think what I'm saying, historians pick out what happened. It wasn't the event, it was the second.
Well, what I'm saying is that what historians do is gather the evidence of past events, put them together into perhaps a narrative of some kind, and give and impose meaning on it. Because otherwise it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's not. You can't go back and, unlike a scientist, you can. How does a scientist verify whether a scientific
They go back.
scientific discovery is valid or not? Well, can you reproduce it?
Yeah.
Can you reproduce it? Well, you can't do that. You can't go back and refight the Battle of Gettysburg.
Granted,
We should build a
when
time
people
machine.
are fighting in war, they're just fighting. They're fighting to live and for their cause. They're not
Survive.
thinking. It's not like a tournament where it's the Normandy tournament. It's the name just comes from the fact that they fought on Normandy Beach. That's just
Yeah, I mean, people at the time, of course, knew that the Normandy invasion was an important part of the war. That this was the Allied return to the continent. But But later, people had memories of that day. As one soldier said, as I got off the landing craft, he said, "I thought this was not like a movie," because his reference was whether war was like a movie or not. And he said, "I don't think this is like a movie."
Over dramatization.
Well, I mean, whenever we think back with history, we're looking at a bird's eye view. You got to remember that the personal perspective is going to be different. Somebody on this side is going to have a different view than somebody on this side. The circumstances are going to play out differently, and that's why we can have so many different versions or views of a particular battle.
Already. Are we ready to go to the next question?
Yes. What do you believe is the general's dying thought? Do you believe he lives long enough to feel satisfaction from his granddaughter's graduation?
I don't really think he didn't really have much of an opinion about his daughter's graduation.
I don't think he didn't want to be there.
He wanted the attention. He was there for attention.
West.
Well, yeah, attention, but
Being there for her
He was-
is part of the tradition.
He wasn't
but-
remembering people's names, let alone him wanting to be at their graduation either.
Well, I mean, the whole thought when he's going down is he's listening to the speaker's words.
Mhm.
You can't see, you can't interpret the future until you've, interpreted the past.
Mhm.
And his past is a lie. So
Mhm.
that is what he is passing on to his daughter.
Well, for the people at that ceremony, he is he is the imagined past. He doesn't know why he's there, other than the fact that he likes to sit on stages and he likes to kiss the pretty girls, But other than that, he hadn't even remembered probably even what side he fought on at that point in his life. And so what she's trying to comment on is this concept of memory and how it's used, how it's abused.
I could say that would be a way to look at it. Definitely. Already done. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
It was a good read. Very hard to deconstruct because I'm not really a history major or English, but this is great literature. I enjoyed reading it.
I think in a way, if you know enough about the just the general structure of the Civil War, I think that you can have a good time reading it.
Do you think that you have to know about the Civil War to appreciate the late encounter with the enemy?
I don't think you need to have this appreciation. It's as unique, like Josh said.
Maybe basics.
Yeah.
I think there are
Basics.
things that people should know about the Civil War to begin with, but the places, I would think that people would imagine that those are battles. But I think I think that anybody can read this. I think this is an anybody read, not just a history read.
So you think it has more universal value than
I would say
a
so.
piece
There's more
of sort
to
of
it.
Southern literature that's sort of dated, that this is much beyond that?
I think so. You agree?
Oh yeah, I love Flannery OConnor. I love her letters. I like her philosophy. I think she's one of the real jewels of American literature, and I would encourage everyone to go out, read her short stories. They're sometimes they're very difficult sometimes to get through, but well worth the effort. And she's a beautiful woman.
If you're interested in reading this story, I'll leave a link to where I read the story, and if I can find this within a collection that she wrote, I'll leave that as well in the description box. Already, be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Bye.